From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now! We're on the road in Tampa, Florida.
Just shows you that precedent means nothing, that the law is politics by other means, and that the Constitution means nothing.
The Supreme Court's denied an appeal from death row prisoner Mumia Abu-Jamal. We'll hear his reaction to the news and speak with his attorneys. Then a roundtable discussion on the state of the media here in Florida with the publisher of the St. Petersburg Times, Florida's largest newspaper, the news director of community radio station WMNF, and the editor of La Gaceta, one of the oldest minority newspapers in the United States. And we'll get the latest on a controversial story developing here in Tampa, where immigration officials have just arrested a 23-year-old Florida student on the same charges a federal jury acquitted him of on Friday. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Rescue workers in Italy continue to search for survivors from yesterday's earthquake that killed at least 179 people. More than 1,500 people have been injured. Tens of thousands have been left homeless. The quake devastated the city of L'Aquila and surrounding towns. The Italian Prime Minister, Silvio Berlusconi, declared a state of emergency in the region.
At
this moment, we are most concerned about rescuing people who are still under the rubble. We are not using machines for this because experience has shown us that it is important to dig by hand.
Monday's earthquake was the deadliest to hit Italy in nearly 30 years, but it did not come as a surprise to all. An Italian seismologist had predicted a large earthquake was on the way, but authorities forced him to remove his findings from the internet. In its once secret report, the International Committee of the Red Cross concluded U.S. medical personnel were deeply involved in the CIA's torture of prisoners held in overseas prisons. The Red Cross report said the actions of medical personnel, quote, constituted a gross breach of medical ethics and in some cases amounted to participation in torture. The Red Cross's secret 2007 report was published in its entirety yesterday by the New York Review of Books. The Red Cross also called on the United States to, quote, investigate all allegations of ill treatment and take steps to punish the perpetrators where appropriate and to prevent such abuses from happening again. Attorney and blogger Scott Horton's reporting Senate Republicans are threatening to filibuster two top Justice Department nominees if the Obama administration releases secret Bush administration memos that authorize the torture of prisoners. The nominees are Don Johnson as chief of the Office of Legal Counsel in the Department of Justice and Yale Law School Dean Harold Koh as State Department legal counsel. Horton writes, quote, it now appears that Republicans are seeking an Obama commitment to safeguard the Bush administration's darkest secrets in exchange for letting those nominations go forward. In a speech before the Turkish legislature, President Obama vowed Monday to improve U.S. relations with the Muslim world.
I know there have been difficulties these last few years. I know that the trust that binds the United States and Turkey has been strained. And I know that strain is shared in many places where the Muslim faith is practiced. So let me say this as clearly as I can. The United States is not and will never be at war with Islam.
President Obama went on to praise Islam's contribution to civilization and said America's relationship with it must extend beyond fighting terrorism. Turkey is the first predominantly Muslim nation Obama has visited as president. The New York Times reports Obama administration officials are proposing to step up its use of drones to carry out strikes inside Pakistan and start bombing targets deep inside the country. This comes as Defense Secretary Robert Gates is requesting a large increase in funding to build unmanned drones like the Predator. Gates wants to increase spending on unmanned drones by 127% over a year ago. On Monday, Gates proposed making sweeping changes to the military budget by halting several Cold War-era projects, including the F-22 stealth fighter, while increasing spending on counterinsurgency and fighting guerrilla wars.
There's broad agreement on the need for acquisition and contracting reform in the Department of Defense. There have been enough studies, enough hand-wringing, enough rhetoric. Now is the time for action.
As part of his plan, Robert Gates proposed increasing the size of the Pentagon Special Forces by 5%. Gates also proposed reducing the Pentagon's dependence on private contractors by hiring 30,000 new civil servants over the next 5 years to replace contractors. Overall, Gates wants Congress to spend $664 billion on the Pentagon, including the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. This is a $9 billion increase over the current budget. 2008 was the most dangerous year on record for aid workers. This according to a new report by the Center on International Cooperation. 122 aid workers died last year while carrying out their work. 45 aid workers died in Somalia alone. Another 33 died in Afghanistan. The overall number of aid workers killed has soared nearly fourfold in the past decade. In labor news, efforts to pass the Employee Free Choice Act have been dealt a major setback. Democratic Senator Blanche Lincoln of Arkansas said Monday she cannot support the bill. Lincoln represents Arkansas, the home of Walmart, a leading opponent of the legislation that would make it easier for workers to form unions. Walmart recently hired one of Lincoln's former aides to lobby against the Employee Free Choice Act. Supporters of the bill need a filibuster-proof 60 votes. In economic news, New York Attorney General Andrew Cuomo has brought civil fraud charges against a hedge fund manager, saying he secretly steered $2.4 billion in client money into Bernard Madoff's Ponzi fraud. Ezra Merkin is a well-known investor and former chair of the GMAC finance company. Ceremonies are being held today in Rwanda to mark the 15th anniversary of the 1994 genocide, in which more than 1 million people died. 20,000 Rwandans gathered today in Nyanza, where thousands of people were slaughtered during the '94 massacre. In London, nearly 1,000 Tamil protesters blocked Westminster Bridge next to the Parliament building early today to demand the Sri Lankan government halt an offensive against Tamil Tiger separatists. The Sri Lankan military claims it's killed 453 Tamil Tigers over the past 4 days. It's unknown how many civilians have been killed. The Observer newspaper of London reports a British man who died during last week's G20 protests was assaulted by riot police shortly before he suffered a heart attack. This according to witness statements received by the Independent Police Complaints Commission. At the time, the 47-year-old, Ian Tomlinson, was walking home from work and not taking part in the protests. At least 2 eyewitnesses said Tomlinson was hit by police officers before he collapsed. Activists organizing a boycott of Motorola are claiming victory after Motorola sold a part of its company that sells bomb fuses, communication devices, and surveillance equipment to the Israeli military. Last month, the New York Campaign for the Boycott of Israel launched a boycott of Motorola, accusing the company of supporting Israel's military occupation. The boycott is still ongoing. In science news, an ice bridge which had held a vast Antarctic ice shelf in place for hundreds of years has shattered. Scientists said it may herald a wider collapse linked to global warming. Temperatures on the Antarctic Peninsula have risen by up to 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit in the last 50 years, the fastest rate of warming in the Southern Hemisphere. And in Vermont, Republican Governor Jim Douglas has vetoed legislation that would legalize same-sex marriage. The House and Senate are expected to try to override the governor's veto today. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're on the road.